Hi folks, Rob Crompton here with an introduction to another of my earlier novels, The Dark Side of Gilead. This was the second of my novels in which the Fellowship of Gilead featured. This is a fictional religious cult which I based upon the Jehovah's Witnesses. All three of my Gilead novels tell the stories of people who've been affected in one way or another by the way that Gilead has treated them. Leaving Gilead and The Dark Side of Gilead both tell the stories of people who've broken free and paid the price. Misfits in Gilead, the latest of my Gilead novels, is rather different because the players there have not yet broken free. More of that later though. Let's take a closer look at The Dark Side of Gilead. I remember the exact time and place when the earliest ideas for The Dark Side began to form in my imagination. I'd recently published one of my other novels, Solomon's Magpie, and Maggie and I were spending a few days in Spain visiting our son who lives and works in Ubeda, in the heart of the Andalusian olive-growing region. I was already casting around in my imagination for ideas for my next novel. So early one evening, while waiting to go and spend an evening enjoying vinos and tapas in some of the town's splendid bars and cafes, I was scribbling in my notebook. A sentence came into my mind. Most people know where they come from, who their mum and dad were, where they went to school, and things like that. But Lisa was different. That was it, no more, but it was enough to set me off on a journey of imagination, trying to figure out who Lisa was and why she did not seem to know anything about her background. By the time we set off to return home, I had the makings of a new novel. Lisa was a 10-year-old girl trapped in a junk room at the home of one of the elders of a Fellowship of Gilead congregation. That dark secret was soon to be uncovered. Or was it? Okay, to set the scene then, Vic is a 10-year-old boy who has been battered into becoming a low achiever. He's been taken out of school to be homeschooled by parents who haven't much of a clue about educational matters. It was a Wednesday afternoon, while Vic was still on the homeschooling thing, that his dad insisted on trying. So he was on his own at home, half-heartedly doing some lesson stuff that his mother had given him before she went knocking on doors, telling people the wonderful news of death and destruction at Armageddon any time soon. This was before she'd given up altogether on trying to do anything remotely educational for the learning at home lark. Vic was still pretending to be doing the lesson thing when Nigel, his friend, came round directly after real school. "Leave that," he said, dangling a key on a string in front of Vic's face. "We want to go on a snooper's hunt." Vic shoved his book and his pens and things into the drawer. His mum wouldn't bother to check on how much he'd done. She hardly ever did. And he followed Nigel, not knowing where they were going except that a snooper's hunt meant they'd be nosing around somewhere they shouldn't, like poking around the building site at Parker Whelan's, where they were having a new service bay installed, or rooting about at the council rubbish tip, looking for anything they might find a use for. But this time, it really was a properly shouldn't sort of place. A definitely do not go in there place. They marched resolutely and purposefully down Middleton Lane, past the big parish church where Nigel always used to spit over the wall, or where they would even go and pee in the side doorway, because people at that church worshipped the devil. And from there they went into Kenwood Park, along the avenue at the old gatehouse. At the far side of the park, through the formal gardens and beyond the churned-up playing fields where the annual funfair had recently been, a long line of old houses backed onto the fields, and Vic and Nigel knew one of them quite well, because it was where they used to come to be bored brainless at the Tuesday evening Bible study group meeting. "Where are we going?" asked Vic, suspecting by this time precisely where they were heading. We're not going to Brother Robinson's place, are we?" Nigel replied with no more than a gruff "follow me," like he was the one who was always entitled to be in the lead. Of course he was, because his dad was an elder, and Vic's dad wasn't. Vic thought they would probably go down the passage between a couple of the houses and onto the main road like they used to do every Tuesday evening. But they veered off to the right. Then, instead of making like they were going to join the path along the back fences and come out near the library, they headed straight for one of the houses, the one with the neatly trimmed privet hedge and the narrow gap where there used to be a little gate which had been blocked off to stop people taking the shortcut through the garden. "But that's Brother Robinson's house," Vic protested. "We can't go in there. I mean, we can't climb over the fence." Nigel dangled the key again. "Yes, we can." "You mean that's his key? Where did you get it?" "My mum does his housekeeping." "He's a bookkeeping." Vic was thinking, so you tag along and nick his key? So she has a spare key to get into his office when he's away, like he is now. Nigel went over the fence at the gap in the hedge, unconcerned about whether any of the neighbours might see. Meekly, Vic followed. They went down the side of the house and around to the front, and as confidently as if he had every right to be going in there, Nigel opened the door. "But what if he's... I mean, we can't be doing this. It's not right," Vic whispered urgently. But he followed Nigel inside anyway, and all the time he was half expecting that Brother Robinson, would suddenly appear and catch them. As Vic tiptoed silently along the narrow hallway, Nigel walked ahead, making no attempt at stealth. He threw the sitting room door open. "Shh!" hissed Vic. "What's up?" retorted Nigel. "Nobody's going to hear us. He's miles away and he won't be back until tonight." "No, but He shouldn't have come. Shouldn't have, Vic kept telling himself. They were going to get into serious trouble. He knew it. But he still followed Nigel into the sitting room, where they always had the Tuesday evening meetings. Only the previous evening they'd been in there. And of course, there was nothing interesting. It was just the same as it was on a Tuesday, when about 12 or more crowded in there for the boring Bible study meeting. Even cold and empty, it was as though you could still hear Brother Robinson droning on about wonderful this or wonderful that, or else wicked them and wicked those. Only this time, instead of feeling utterly bored, Vic was terrified. He knew it. He knew it wouldn't happen, but he couldn't help expecting that Robbo would come through the front door at any moment. They didn't go upstairs because to do that would have been far too scary, even for Nigel, and they didn't go into his office, like he might actually be in there, waiting to nab them. So they rummaged around in his living room and his kitchen. There was one room they really wanted to get into, but they couldn't because it was locked with a great big brass padlock. Why would anyone want to lock a door inside the house with a big padlock? That was weird, and it was what Nigel specially wanted to see, just in case it had been left unfastened. The padlock first appeared a couple of weeks earlier, and a couple of the people who were at the Tuesday evening Bible study meeting had noticed and wondered. Nigel's mother, not usually being the suspicious or nosy kind where fellow Gilead folk were concerned, had remarked on the way home, "I wonder what he keeps in there that needs a padlock to keep us all out." Vic thought he knew the answer, because Nigel had already told him that he'd heard something moving in there. "I think it's a dog. He needs to make sure that nobody lets it loose during the meeting." And nobody seemed to wonder why, if that was the case, he couldn't simply tell folk to be careful not to let the dog out. That was probably why Nigel fixed on Robbo's place for their snoopers hunt, hoping that he might have left the padlock off. But he hadn't, and Vic thought they would never know what it was that he kept inside that room. It was the most boring, stupid snoopers hunt that you could imagine. Looking round a quite ordinary place which they knew already, and not finding anything in the slightest bit interesting. Nothing any more interesting than when they were there for the Bible study meetings. Pointless. Completely tossing pointless. But Nigel hadn't given up, and he led the way out through the back door, and instead of going down the garden and back over the fence, they went the other way, across the back of the house. Nigel reckoned they should be able to take a look into that padlocked room from the outside, but it didn't appear to have any window. So they went into the ramshackle old lean-to, the shed which was piled up with wooden boxes and bags of compost and garden tools, all stacked in a jumbled mess which you would not have expected of a professional gardener. And in the inner brick wall, the rear house wall that the lean-to leaned against, there was a window. It was fairly high up, because the ground sloped to the rear of the house and you had to come down some steps to get to the outside from the back door. Nigel climbed onto a box and peered inside through the grime. "Oh gosh, here, Vic, come and look." He scrambled onto the box, rubbed a bit of the window pane clear and looked inside. There was a girl in there, in the darkness, staring at them and looking really scared. "Who are you?" Vic called to her, but she didn't say anything. She didn't move. She just carried on staring. "Are you all right? Do you need help?" Of course she wasn't all right. How could she be, locked in there like that? It was crazy. Nigel tugged at his arm and he almost fell off the box. "Vic, stop it, we need to go, come on." "We should get help," Vic protested. "Don't be stupid, come on, Vic, come on, we should go." They dashed round to the front of the house, through the gate onto the road. They looked up and down the road to check that nobody had seen them and walked briskly away. At the corner, they broke into a run and didn't slow down until they got to the parade of shops opposite the library. "What do you reckon?" asked Nigel at last. "I mean, do you think we really did see what we thought we saw?" "We saw a girl in the room that he keeps locked," answered Vic, all very matter of fact. "Might not have done." "Might not? What do you mean, might not? We saw a girl in the locked room, a girl locked up. Of course we saw her. How can you say we might not have done? We should go for help." What if it wasn't? I mean, if it was, I don't know, it was so dark in there. Could have been anything, just looking like a girl. Could have been a tailor's dummy or something. What would Brother Robinson want with a tailor's dummy? They decided in the end that they really had seen a girl in that room and that she was there for a very good reason, and they shouldn't say anything about it because, of course, if they did, they would have to admit that they'd been on a snooper's hunt and they'd be in all sorts of trouble. Vic couldn't forget about it, though. It was not the sort of thing that you could shrug off in an "oh well, never mind" sort of way and stop thinking about it, like not thinking about going to the shop for a loaf when you don't need to, or something like that. It stays there in your head. And when you're bored out of your skull at the meeting the very next day, and Brother Robinson is doing a talk about throwing Jezebel out of a window and the dogs eating her. Yes, eating her, for goodness sake. You can only think about that girl locked up in his junk room. And it makes you think maybe you should tell somebody. As soon as the meeting was over, he walked resolutely up to Brother Close, who was the boss elder back then, and had been for as long as anyone could remember. Vic waited for him while he filled out the meeting attendance report. Close finished what he was doing, tucked the report into his briefcase. Vic was ready to blurt out his story. He would have done it, really would have, but Close walked past him and went across to the literature desk. Vic's resolve to do what he was sure was the right and proper thing drained away. It was like reading. He could do it, but he couldn't. It's as if everything gets locked and won't move There was definitely a girl in the junk room. Definitely. But he wasn't sure. There was a good reason for her to be there. And there wasn't. It was yes and no at the same time. Tell about it, but keep quiet. Do it and don't do it. And you can read the rest of the story in The Dark Side of Gilead. I'll leave a link in the comments below if you would like to get a copy of the book and find out what happens to Vic and Nigel and the girl in the junk room. Thanks for listening, folk, and bye for now. Bye.